Hello and welcome back to the British Food History Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Neil Buttery, food historian and chef. Happy 4th of July to all of my listeners in the USA and to all of those around the world who also celebrate this day. It's a big one because the US is celebrating 250 years of independence this year, 2026. And to mark this special day, I've done a special episode, and I have a very special guest, Professor Nancy Siegel, and we're going to talk about the roles that food and drink, especially tea and cake, played. But very quickly, a reminder that early bird tickets for the second online Serve It Forth Food History Festival on 17th of October 2026 are available until the 21st of July. A steal at £10, so snap them up. We will be announcing our guests and topics soon enough. Before we begin, do please remember that Season 10 of the podcast is sponsored by Netherton Foundry. Netherton Foundry are producers of top-quality British-made cookery equipment. Nestled in rural South Shropshire, they are headed by Neil and Sue Curry, who take inspiration from the local ironmasters of the 18th and 19th centuries to craft traditional cookware from iron, oak and copper using non-toxic materials. Their cookware is built to last, whether it be their famous prospector pans, one of which I am a proud owner, their crumpet rings or their impressive range of outdoor cookware. Netherton Foundry ships to several countries outside of the UK, including the USA and Canada, so why not visit their website, netherton-foundry.co.uk, to find out more about their wonderful products, approved not just by me, but by folks such as Tom Parker Bowles, Diana Henry and Nigella Lawson. Okay, let's go. There's a lot packed into this episode. I am talking with Nancy Siegel, Professor of Art History and Culinary History at Towson University, Maryland. She specialises in American landscape studies, underrepresented women artists of the 19th century, print culture, and this is the important one for us, the culinary history of the 18th and 19th centuries. Nancy and I took part in the British Library food season all the way back in 2024, and I'm so glad that we got the opportunity to chat again. And lucky for me, Nancy was in London visiting the British Library. At exactly the same time, I just happened to be in London as well, so we got to record this conversation in person in the breakfast room of Nancy's hotel, the Harlingford Hotel, so a big thank you to them for hosting us. Nancy has written an excellent book that's not out until the autumn in the USA and not until December in the UK, but I've been lucky enough to get a sneak peek at it. It's called Political Appetites, The Power of Food in Revolutionary America, published by Johns Hopkins University Press. And in that book, Nancy documents the roles food and drink, especially tea and its trappings, played in the colonists of North America wanting to sever their ties with Britain, and how food was used to help distance themselves culturally from the British. Because at first, the colonists very much identified as British. Folk in the USA, Nancy has also made a documentary on this topic called Feeding the American Revolution. And in the episode, she explains how you can watch it much better than I can. We talk about the tax on tea and the Boston Tea Party, tea alternatives, culinary activists such as the women of Edenton, Amelia Simmons, and giant independence cakes. Those listening to The Secret Podcast get loads of bonus materials where we discuss George III's botanist, American pride in abundance, the value of hunting out original documents, baking fails, the all-American apple pie, and the function of satire, plus more. I'll be back at the end, but now, please enjoy Tea, Cake, and the American Revolution with Nancy Siegel. Welcome to the podcast, Nancy. It's very nice to speak to you again.
It is wonderful to speak with you again. I can't believe it's been 2 years.
Two flipping years.
Yes. We first met in the summer of 2024 at the food season at the British Library, we're just a few steps from there right now. We're sitting in the lovely breakfast room at the Harlingford Hotel, and they were kind enough to let us use their space so we could have a chat.
Yes, very kind of them. You've written a fantastic book. I very much enjoyed reading it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But before we start talking about that, could you tell listeners just a little bit about yourself and why this book has come to be?
Sure, I would love to. So I am a professor of art history and culinary history at Towson University, which is just outside of Baltimore, Maryland, in the States. And a lot of my research has been on American landscape painters of the 19th century, a group of artists known as the Hudson River School painters. And I was finishing a book, this was a number of years ago, on the artistry of an artist named Thomas Cole. And it was the dissemination of his imagery, how a drawing that he made in the late 1820s became the basis for a series of engravings and soup plates that were made in Staffordshire for an American audience. Mm-hmm. And I was finishing this project and I was looking at the bottom of the soup plate. And as is usually the case, I'm thinking about food at the same time and trying not to be terribly distracted. And I was wondering what would have been eaten out of this soup plate. And it was the same time that the French government refused to support American troops in Iraq.
Right.
So 2 members of Congress decided, well, then you can't call French fries in federal cafeterias.
Oh, I remember this.
Right,
yes.
You have to call them freedom fries.
Freedom fries.
And I thought this was some of the most questionable logic that I had heard. But as I was staring at the bottom of this beautiful soup plate that had this wonderful scenery of American landscape and thinking about what would have been served in that bowl, I wondered if there was a connection between politics and food and decorative arts and the preparation and the serving of foods. And so that's how this project began. And so we go backwards from freedom fries to American origins, which for this project is a cup of Liberty tea and a slice of election cake.
Yes. And I'm assuming quite soon, because it's the 250th year, of course, of American independence.
It is.
Are you expecting a big do? Are you going to be making a giant election cake and handing around that Liberty tea?
Well, there is great fanfare being planned, as you know, on large and smaller levels. So I am spending time traveling about the country, doing lectures and some historical tastings. So I have a database of over 1,200 honorific recipes, which we can get into in a little bit. So I'm making election cakes and independence cake and democratic tea cakes and federal cake and Republican cake, Washington pies.
There was Washington everything.
There was
Washington everything.
There was Washington.
That's what I've discovered.
Everything. Absolutely. There are at least 50 separate Washington recipes. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just what I have in my own database.
It's got one volume on
it could be
Washington.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
So all of this, several years, I mean, we were talking about this very topic 2 years ago. So you've been looking at this for a long time. So all this has been distilled, poured into your book. Political Appetites.
Yes, Political Appetites, The Power of Food in Revolutionary America. So it's being published by Johns Hopkins University Press, and it will come out in October in the States, and it will be released in the UK in December. And the book is the basis for a documentary that's being made with WMHT, which is a New York affiliate of PBS, so American Public Media, called Feeding the American Revolution, where I serve as the host, and we travel along the Eastern Seaboard, stopping off at incredible historical sites, speaking to wonderful scholars and historians, and telling the story of the American Revolution through foods that were contested and celebrated and the recipes that were being made.
It's a fantastic book. I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you.
And what I really like, and I think this happens more with books about food than any other book written by academics, they're always very approachable if you're not an academic yourself. Sometimes, academic books can sometimes be quite full on and you have to take a rest every 1.5 pages.
Oh, absolutely. I've been on both sides of that page for sure. And I think with this project, because food is so universal and so approachable, there was great appeal for me to work on this. And I think one of the best litmus tests for me is to discuss it with my students.
Yeah.
Because university students are extremely honest, and they will either verbally or through yawns or back on their phones, you'll know if you're hitting the mark.
Yes, when you look at all those glazed over eyes, you know you're not doing the job properly.
Absolutely.
I've been there.
But if you can tell them stories about the importance of establishing a new government, and which was based upon language that in itself is really privileged, words like freedom and democracy and independence, and those words didn't apply to everyone. So how do we know that these ideals resonated with everyday individuals? So I think when you look at daily practices such as buying food, growing food, making recipes, that's, I think, to me, a good indicator of what people are interested in. And so it really resonated with students. They love the stories of a mammoth cheese, a 1,235-pound cheddar cheese made for Thomas Jefferson. But really the backstory is it was made in celebration not only of his presidency, but also his advocacy for a separation between church and state. And so now we have politics and religion all enmeshed with the production of a massive cheese.
Now, let's do a little bit of grounding
Yes.
when it comes to the people. Well, I guess that would be central to America, North America, the United States becoming independent from Britain, because this is the British Food History podcast.
Yes.
Before independence, the United States, are they officially United States at this point?
No.
But it's Britain. It's a part of Britain, essentially.
It's absolutely. And colonists from Britain saw themselves as British citizens.
Yeah.
And they had family and friends at home. Benjamin Franklin referred to himself, right, as British.
Yeah.
Until such time as after the Revolution, when then he called himself an American citizen.
So you had to draw a line. So
Yeah.
now,
And this language becomes incredibly important, for sure.
When it comes to day-to-day activities then, because a lot of people say that tea time is a Victorian thing. Most of the things that we think of as Victorian were going on a good 100 or even more years in the past. They're often Georgian. I'd say tea time is definitely a Georgian thing. So the people of the British people in this colony, I guess they're carrying on being British. They've got the trappings of British people doing tea time just the same as everybody else. Would you say?
They are, yes. And there's a desire to, because on the one hand, there's a desire to continue with traditions and favorite foodstuffs, right? You want things from home. There was a real homesickness. And you also need to think that all of these elements of refinery had to be imported.
Yeah.
And everything that's imported is taxed. And that's going to become a problem. But this idea about tea is, I think, it's just this simple plant, and yet it's so involved with domesticity and refinement and elegance of decor and then politics. And so something like the British East India Tea Company is what is providing hundreds of thousands of pounds of tea into the colonies. So one, you have to be able to afford this, right? So from the late 17th century, it's a drink of the upper classes.
Yes.
But then when you get into the earlier to mid 18th century, now it's pretty affordable because the East India Company is importing tons and tons of tea. The market is glutted. I mean, that creates their own financial problems for the company. But in terms of the colonists, it becomes widely important and widely available. This also gives rise to, if you have tea, you need to invent an object to serve it from.
Of course.
And so that gives us the teapot.
Yeah.
And so we need to import this as well. There's some pottery production happening in the colonies, but it's minimal, it's not refined, it's not sought after. What people want is what's packed as the ballast of these ships coming over from China, right? And so not only does it keep the tea above that lower level and keep it from getting wet, but these are crates that are packed with beautiful cups and saucers and tea service. And so the idea of having an elegant tea table really was a demonstration that you were refined.
Yes.
And I think what's also very important to recognize is class structure in the colonies is a little different. And so for a number of people, they wanted to posture or assume a level of economic ability that they probably would not have been able to achieve at home. Mm-hmm. And so buying a mahogany tea table, buying a tea service, even if it's minimal, and buying this beautiful Hyson and bohea tea and serving it, and then being able to afford sugar with your little tongues and you can nip off bits, right? And then a beautiful creamer to serve cream with your tea. And then, of course, you want some plates and platters where you could serve some lovely tea cakes. All of this was part of the ceremony,
yes,
the dance of demonstrating that not only had you arrived, but you were thriving in these colonies.
One thing that I liked, because in the 18th century, all the etiquette surrounding tea and tea time, what you do, what your behaviour is being formed at this time. So something that really stood out to me, I think perhaps maybe because I identify with the people, because I always get things wrong socially. I get a bit nervous and things just go to pot.
Yes.
I don't know about you.
Yeah.
I'm not
yes.
very good in social situations. But one of the things that I kind of amused me, but I could really identify, was they weren't quite getting it right. So using tea leaves in rather unusual ways. Do you know what I'm getting at?
I know what you're getting at. I'm gonna preface this with, there are also some fabulous satires, right? There's one of from 1777 called The Old Maid, of a woman who's sitting alone at her tea table,
right,
and she's sipping tea from the saucer, not the cup. Mm-hmm. Right. And so ways in which you would be, making fun of the performance of tea drinking. But yes, drinking tea was a learned behavior. And so for, many of the colonists very early on, they would boil the tea leaves like you would a vegetable.
Yeah.
And then eat the tea leaves and then throw out the brew. So this was sort of a learned behavior.
It would make sense, though, because the leaves back then were really, it wasn't like little tiny flakes that we get now. Sometimes it was whole leaves that had been rolled up and things like that. So it does make sense.
It does make sense.
You can see why they make that mistake.
Oh, yeah, I'm not judging.
It just makes perfect sense. I would have made the same mistake, probably.
Me too, for sure.
Yeah.
But then I think after consuming those leaves, they recognized, wow, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah, sure.
Right. It's like when you make a recipe for the first time and you think, oh, something's gone terribly wrong. And, that I use salt instead of sugar, right? And I think many of us have done that. I know I've done that before. It's a mistake that you make once.
Now, this is going to be very important. Let's talk tax.
Yes.
Don't roll your eyes, everyone listening at home. This is important.
This is important.
It's ridiculous. It becomes all quite ridiculous. But what's going on with the tax and governance? How's the place being run and taxed? It's Britain, but there isn't a president. So who's in charge, and how's things like tax working? Because this really is the crux of the matter, isn't it?
So it was very important that Parliament maintained control over its colonies.
Yeah.
North America has a lot of natural resources, mm-hmm. and so those raw ingredients are sent abroad, they're made into products, then they're sent back. Oh, and you can purchase them once again, but there'll be a tax on that. And just about everything was taxed, right? There's the Sugar Act, there's the Stamp Act of 1765, and that was a disaster. Even George knew this is not a good idea, and within a year he repealed it. But the one thing that Parliament and George was really set on was, we need to keep this tax on tea. Because it's so popular. It's so important. This is a habit that people are taking multiple times a day.
And it's, I guess, in modern parlance, you'd say this is an elastic product. People just pay whatever for this stuff. So this is a cash cow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you think about, how are people earning income? So we have a growing merchant class, mm-hmm. and that's very significant. These are the people who are also importing and then selling the tea, as well as the pieces for the tea table and the sugar and all of that. And ultimately, the colonists didn't fundamentally have a problem with taxes per mm-hmm. se. It was that they had no authority. They were not part of the conversations, that the taxes were imposed, but they had no legal influence to make changes.
Yeah.
And that was the big part. It's what you find on the license plates in cars in Washington, D.C. Taxation without representation.
That's it. And people have probably heard that phrase, haven't they? Yes.
And so it's about language. And this just became more and more oppressive. And a growing percentage of colonists decided, look, we're not going to put up with this anymore. And so we're going to decide, not only are we not going to consume these items, we're not going to import them either.
See how you like that.
See how you like that. And that did not go over well.
No.
That did not go over well. First, it didn't go over well with George, who was pretty, roughed up about this idea. And not every colonist was in favor of this either. There was a large population of loyalists who said, we want things to stay as they are because I love being able to buy my lace collars.
Yeah, I'm doing okay, thank you.
I'm doing fine. In fact, I'm doing better than I might have done at home.
Yeah,
so this is great. Leave us be.
But it's the principle, right? Because, I guess you're paying all this tax. We pay tax and we put up with it. It's just part of life. But I'm assuming all this tax is going back to Britain. It's not like it's building infrastructure in North America for people to benefit from. It's just getting sent over the pond.
Yes, and that's such an important point, because as Britain's empire is expanding, and something like the French and Indian Wars that had taken place in the 1750s, it was really expensive. And those war debts had to be paid somehow. And so, the most likely source was, the North American colonies have lumber and fish and tobacco.
It's infinite forests, I've heard people call it. It's just...
Yes, white pines for maths. They've got plenty of them. Let's bring them over. So it was actually illegal to cut down white pines in the colonies that weren't being then sent back to England.
Not for personal consumption.
Not for personal consumption. And so this was onerous. Like today when we have problems...
that's going to wear thin quite quickly.
Yeah, when we have problems with taxes now, we think, all right, well, then we're going to vote these people out of office.
Yes.
But there wasn't that mechanism in place. And so that's where non-importation movements and non-consumption movements became so important. And they grew in popularity in major cities like Boston and New York and Philadelphia. So we have some really important examples of when those actions resonated.
So if people were avoiding tea... or looking like they were avoiding tea. I bet there was a few of those.
Oh, yeah.
What were they drinking then? If they weren't drinking tea of the tea plant tea?
Yeah, there's always smuggled tea that's coming in from
Holland. There's been big pressure to smuggle. That's a hole in the plan that they haven't thought of in Britain, isn't it?
Right, because there's a whole series of East India companies. There's like at least 16 East India companies, and everybody wants a piece of this.
Right,
tea still comes in from Holland, not on the same quantities. Some of the smuggled tea, there was questions about its purity. So sometimes it wasn't even made from tea leaves themselves, from the tea plant. Sometimes it was adulterated. Sometimes there was metal shavings in there. So you didn't always know what you were going to get.
Yeah, all right, okay.
So that could be problematic. But then, so there are these new botanical specimens that you're finding. And there's also the existing medical knowledge that you're bringing with you for how to use herbs. And the kitchen garden becomes really important. So women would utilize the knowledge that they already had. And then learn from indigenous healers. So a wonderful example is raspberry leaves. And raspberry leaves had long been used to ease pain from childbirth. And this was one example where the tea was being made, but then just renamed and called Liberty Tea. And so all of a sudden, these teas, these drinks, these medicinal concoctions are being repurposed with very political agency.
Yeah, it's clever psychology, really, because it's suddenly giving you just a little bit of vigor, political vigor. It's a political action, just having your cup of raspberry leaf tea, except it's not it's Liberty Tea.
Right, so it's Liberty Tea. So you would have teapots. So the Potters in Staffordshire were very clever.
I loved this.
Oh, there's a whole line, right? They're thinking, you know what? The North American colonies are ripe for marketing.
They really hate us. Let's make some money out of this.
Let's make some money. They love tea. They hate taxes.
Yeah.
So let's see what we can do. Oh, we're going to make teapots that have in 1765. So produced from about 1765 to 1770. There's a whole series of no Stamp Act was printed on these. Or after 1766, it was Stamp Act repealed. So,
It's so funny.
There are these great ways that you can combine culinary treat with your political affiliation.
Capitalism.
If you were going to use this teapot surrounded by your other women friends, right, chances are you're inviting these women who have a very similar political leaning as you do as well. And we find that there are groups of colonial women who begin to organize and really lead a lot of these non-consumption movements. They became incredibly important. And these are who I call the culinary activists. Mm-hmm. The ways in which women became involved in promoting a language of patriotism through the foods that they used and cooked.
How did that go down? Was that a little bit kind of, was that not going down too well with the gentlemen of North America? Or did they think, oh no, let's go with this because it means it's catching on? Or was it kind of looked down upon? These women are getting a little bit too cocky here. We don't like it. Or was it encouraged?
That happened a great deal in the newspapers back in Britain.
Right.
Most people know about the Boston Tea Party, which was December 16th, 1773. And this is where tons and tons of British tea are summarily thrown into Boston's harbor. And the Sons of Liberty were responsible for, under cover of night, entering these 3 ships that were in the harbor. They were not allowed to unload their cargo. They dressed up as Native American Indians, so they were costumed, which in itself has its problem related to, sort of adopting an indigenous identity, but also they covered their identity. They didn't want people to know who they were. And so after the Boston Tea Party, John Adams is writing about this, like the day after. And he uses terms like, wow, this was sublime. He thinks that this was just a remarkable act, but he's also pretty concerned about, now what happens? Because we just destroyed property that was not our own. So what kind of retribution will there be? So in Parliament, Lord North decides, well, I'm going to close Boston's port. Like, that's it. I'm going to cut you off. You don't want tea? We don't want you having anything. Like, good luck. Good luck to you.
Yes, be careful what you wish for kind of thing.
That's it. Yes, take that, colonists. And so the Boston Port Bill was signed in March. It's enacted in June. And there are a number of satirical prints that are made in light of this. But it also gives credence to a vast number of these other non-importation movements. And a famous one happens down in Edenton, North Carolina, where 51 women decided to sign a pact that they would no longer have imported tea or imported cloth. And this was a really big deal. And they signed their name to this document and they sent it abroad. And the theory is that it was sent to George III. He didn't actually receive it, but the newspapers did receive it and they printed it. And then they mocked these women. And there's a wonderful satirical print called The Society of Patriotic Ladies.
Yes, there's a lot going on in that print.
There's a lot going on where their actions are lampooned. And there's a woman who's overseeing this event with a gavel, and her profile looks very much like George III. So there's great mockery. And women pouring the rest of their tea from their tea caddies into hats that will then be burned. And down in the foreground, there's a small child who's being taken care of by a dog who licks the child's face and
simultaneously shunning their responsibilities.
Absolutely. And urinates on this tea caddy. Right. So fantastic satire. So women were mocked for their activities. But I think that because it took place in the domestic realm, this was their safe space.
Yes, it wasn't exactly feminist in how we say feminist today. They weren't going beyond their boundaries. They were very much sticking to social norms, but really pushing them.
Yes, and I think this is where women found their outlet. There are some fantastic writers as well who are pushing those boundaries and are publishing tracts comparable to those of men. But it's in this domestic space that's where we start seeing these culinary activists developing these honorific recipes. And this changes the tide of American cuisine post-revolution when we're looking for some kind of identity. Who are we and what do we believe in?
Yes, because like we said before, you've got to suddenly draw a line. But one thing I know that in the 18th century books, cookery books, the very popular ones are those by Hannah Glass,
Yes.
Eliza Smith,
Yes.
my fave, Elizabeth Raffald.
And you're a good friend. Yes.
Yes, my dear friend Elizabeth Raffald. So, and you flick through those books, and I mean, there's a few weird recipes, but they're basically, they're books of traditional British food with some weird oddities.
Yes.
But mainly traditional British food.
Yeah.
So that's a real gear shift you got to make when it comes to your food identity, because it's important. Food identity is really important. I mean, it's poo-pooed, I think, by a lot of people in academia, but it's very important. So what do you do about that?
So, those are the books that come over to the colonies, of course. And those are recipes that cooks and hostesses are relying upon.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then in 1796, there's the publication of a book called American Cookery.
Yes.
By a woman named Amelia Simmons. And she presents herself on the cover of her book as an American orphan, which that could be troublesome as well. But the book itself is considered the first cookbook that is written in the new United States. Mm-hmm. And in her first edition, 1796, in Hartford, Connecticut, it replicates all of these wonderful British recipes.
Yeah,
I mean, these are tried and true.
Lots of puddings, yeah.
We don't want to get rid of pudding. We don't want to do that.
Well, I'm with you.
We don't want to do that. And so Amelia Simmons doesn't. And her book is very popular. But very soon after, in the same year, she produces a second edition, which is printed in Albany, New York. And it has many of the same recipes, but she expands her section on cakes and pies. And there she includes election cake and independence cake and federal pancake, and they are in succession. It's very specific that they're placed there. And that literally changes the palette of American political cuisine. And so this is not the first time that we have election cake. So John Adams writes in his diary of 1756, he says, spent all day at home, reading a little, eating a little election cake. So we know that this cake was made well prior to the Revolution, right? There were gubernatorial elections in the colonies. There were certain ways in which the colonists were given freedom to run their local governments. So we know that election cake exists, but when Amelia Simmons publishes these recipes, it really opens the floodgates. And so there are truly thousands of honorific cakes that recognize all of these political ideas like independence and freedom and processes like elections, and also founding figures. So they're made for every president and most vice presidents as well.
Correct me if I'm summing this up in too simple a way, but I think this is largely correct. Colonists moved to America, North America, and they very much get stuck in with the indigenous people there, eating their food, getting along fine. Relationships, though, do eventually, they completely break down. There's all sorts of wars and oppression, repression. But one thing that seemed to stand out to me was once independence has been found, there's very much going back to those foods or ingredients and things like that, and really trying to become, because things like the election cake looks like a British cake with an American name.
Yes, absolutely.
So I reckon, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Thanks.
I mean, a cake's a cake.
Thanks.
At the end of the
day.
We
like to think so.
But of course, another way you can distance yourself further is go, let's use ingredients that people in Britain have got no idea about.
Right. Yes. And that's a really important topic. So relationships with Indigenous individuals, clearly these are tribal individuals who are responsible for the survival of the early colonists. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. Relationships at times were friendly, at times they were fraught. There was much to be learned from Indigenous healers, and we find that a lot of these colonial texts then subsume that knowledge as American. So it's appropriating a lot of this information. And Amelia Simmons is also really important too, because to your point about ingredients that were seen as native, something like corn was corn and pumpkin were really utilized. And so things like Johnny cake and hoe cake and pung cake, all of these utilized corn. Something like hasty pudding, right? Which
Yes.
you know has a very strong...
I made one recently.
You did?
I did.
Did you use corn?
No, I didn't.
Interesting.
I do have some maize meal at home, so...
So in the colonies, corn was used to make hasty pudding, and American poet Joel Barlow wrote this very lengthy multiple stanza poem in ode to the hasty pudding made with corn. And Benjamin Franklin waxes poetic about the use of corn as well. So we're claiming those ingredients as something that is distinctly American. It's incredibly nutritious.
Yep.
It's also very inexpensive. And so it breaks down that class structure. And it's pervasive. And so there are thousands and thousands of recipes. Every cookbook that you'll find written in the United States that is focusing on the average diet is including recipes utilizing corn and pumpkin.
The recipes for things like election cake, the amounts required
Oh, they're
are
massive.
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 And am I right that this is not, they're not massive for the same reason the massive cheeses, cheddars are massive?
Right.
Is it more because it's an event and people are so excited about democracy in the country, and it's just like essentially a party? You want to make a big cake to share?
So, of course, this comes out of the British tradition. So there's recipes for great cake,
Yeah.
which have, right, likewise, exceptional amounts of ingredients, which had to have been made in manor homes. I mean, this was the stuff of the wealthiest of the wealthy, because it wasn't only just pounds and pounds and pounds of flour and butter and sugar, which, of course, you have to think about that as a commodity, which is also so heavily tied to the slave trade. But they also utilize a lot of very important ingredients that were expensive. Dried fruits, citrons and raisins, and some of these were decorated in gold leaf. And so when you're working off of the great cake, and I think this is what Amelia Simmons is doing, she takes this idea of massive quantities and then changes the language. Right? So that becomes an independence cake, right? A great cake to an independence cake, a British tradition to now an American tradition. And so it's that language.
But there are subtle differences sneaking in, because I did spot that although superficially the recipes look like a regular British cake, big British cake.
Yeah.
I've noticed very early adoptions. You don't see this in 18th century cookbooks of things like pearl ash and potash and things like that. Because, of course, you're using things like ale, yeast, or you're whisking eggs for hours to get the air into it. But, of course, you've adopted these very early chemical leavening agents.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And they become more and more important. And ways in which you can simplify this process and create a better tasting cake. I don't know the degree to which potash created a lovely tasting cake. I think you had to be very careful with how you're making this, and saleratus as well. But you're right. And so there's certainly recipes that have emptins, the last of the ale, for example, or the last of, say, a risen bread that you could use as your own starter. But you're right, there certainly is this tradition to simplify. And I think part of that also is the rise of cookbooks and the importance of illustrations in cookbooks. It's like the modern day YouTube, so that you know that what you would produce would be successful, because if you're spending money on these ingredients, you want to make sure that it works. And as women were moving farther away from their families, for example, or moving into cities off of farms, they needed to rely upon, one, publications that could help them, and many individuals would hire individuals, or we have enslaved individuals as cooks as well. But there was a desire to also simplify these recipes, number one, and number two, provide more instruction. Things like baking times would be omitted, the amounts of ingredients as well. This needed to be systematized. And that happens into the 19th century.
Yes, it starts happening a little bit. A cookbook from the beginning of the 18th century is unless you already know what you're doing, it's basically impossible.
Right.
You go 100 years and you still have to, by modern standards, there's a lot of gaps.
Oh, absolutely.
But you can work it out.
Yeah.
They're not completely impenetrable like 100 years previously.
Which is interesting, right? Because it suggests that you knew what you were doing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when I'm in the kitchen, if I'm working on a new recipe, and I'll just jot down notes. Or when I was at university, and I probably shouldn't admit to this, when I was in my classes, instead of taking notes about the topic at hand in my class I was sitting in, I would write down ingredients that I thought, what if I combine this with? So it looked like I was really paying attention to what was happening in my macroeconomics class. I had no idea, and I was not successful.
Deciding what you were going to have for your tea.
Yeah. But what came out of that class were some fantastic recipes, and I would take that to market. I knew in my head what those proportions should be. So I understand that process. So, right, because it's not only in the published cookery books, it's also in the handwritten receipt books where we see that women are from generation to generation, right? You can have a handwritten book that changes handwriting halfway through.
Yes.
Right? And so
right.
it was given maybe mother to daughter, and then she continues that tradition, and then maybe gives that to her daughter, and the handwriting changes once again. Or the recipe books where you see glops and gloops, right, of fallen batter or liquids that have spilled. I love that.
Unfortunately, we've got to wrap things up.
Okay.
You've got stuff to do. You've got to get back to that British Library.
I do.
Get note-taking. First of all, it's not out for a few months, of course, but could you just remind listeners about the title of the book and when it's going to be published?
Yes, thank you. So Political Appetites, The Power of Food in Revolutionary America is out in the States in October and here in the UK in December. And then the documentary Feeding the American Revolution will premiere in the States in December, and then it will have national distribution in March. And so I'm booking lectures and historical recipe tastings now for the fall and winter into the spring.
Brilliant.
Yep. So I would be happy to provide for anyone who's interested. You can certainly find me.
Well, how can people find out more about you and all these things that you are doing?
Well, you can certainly email me, and that's nsiegal@towson.edu. My webpage, political-appetites.com, is in the process of being built.
Okay.
So hopefully that will be up before too long. And I would say check your local PBS stations for Feeding the American Revolution, where I host this hour-long documentary.
A third of my listeners are from the USA.
Oh, fantastic. Good. Well, I hope they tune in.
People, yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for sparing the time.
Oh, my goodness, Neil, this was such a pleasure. It's always wonderful to see you, and thank you so very much. And so from the beautiful breakfast room of the Harlingford Hotel, we thank them heartily for allowing us to have this space to have a chat. And next time we'll have a chat with slices of election cake and a cup of Liberty tea.
We will.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. There are links in the show notes to Nancy's page on the Towson University website where you can find out more about her excellent work and projects. There's a link to her book as well, Political Appetites, The Power of Food in Revolutionary America, as well as links to the Edenton Tea Party, an example of one of those political teapots that I love so much, Amelia Simmons' book, American Cookery, and The Ode to Hasty Pudding, that poem by Joel Barlow. Do you have anything to add? What did you think of today's episode? Should I do some more episodes about British food outside of Britain? If so, what should I tackle? Have you ever baked an election cake? Please do let me know. Because there's just one more episode of the pod before the postbag edition, so I need your material. Email me at neil@britishfoodhistory.com or leave a comment on YouTube, the Spotify app, or the accompanying blog post, which is worth checking out this week, by the way, folks, because I've got some really good illustrations and pictures on there to go with today's episode. You can find me on social media. I'm at Neil Buttery on Twitter and Blue Sky, or Dr. that's Dr_Neil_Buttery on Instagram and Threads. And of course, there's the Facebook group, which is at facebook.com/groups/British Food History. Links are in the show notes. Please support the podcast by leaving a review and by giving it a rating on your favourite podcast app. You don't need to write much, by the way. You can just put a little emoji, a little thumbs up, or just write, "Keep going, Butterballs." But if any do pop up, I shall read them out in future episodes. If you can support the podcast, the blogs, and my research financially, I would be ever so grateful. If you go to the Blogstroke website, you can donate a one-off virtual coffee or pint, or start up a monthly £3 subscription, that's about $4.50 to get access to the secret podcast, plus bonus blog posts, a monthly newsletter, and more. Everything I receive goes into making more content. So, go to britishfoodhistory.com and click on the Support the Blog and Podcast tab where you can find out about all of the benefits of becoming a subscriber. The mixing and sound engineering were by Thomas Dinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. But it is now time to go. Have an excellent 4th of July, everybody, and until next time, cheerio.